Students who work inside of and do this, people who do this, are multifaceted. So what your son is doing when he's using an Ableton Push is he's programming a series of pads, and he has to understand and memorize that under this one pad in the grid, there are 8 layers of sounds, and what are they? And he's basically memorizing it. So this is not graphic that goes from left to right. It's what's called nonlinear. And that takes a certain level kind of thinking to remember what's where on the pad and the grid. It's sort of like the Rubik's Cube of music layering. Where is it? How do I get at it? You know what I mean?
You are listening to another outstanding episode of the Music Ed Mentor Podcast, where we help music educators to build, manage, and grow thriving school music programs and have long and happy careers. In this episode, we continue our foray into technology in music education, this time delving into electronic music. This particular subject is almost completely foreign to me. As our regular listeners will know, I do not claim to be a music technology person. I am a minimalist through and through. So if I don't need to use it, I'm not going to use it. That's why I pull in one of the definitive music technology experts in electronic music especially, and teachers in the U.S., Barbara Freedman, to help me out. She was named in 2012 Time Technology Teacher of the Year, and she has been teaching electronic music and audio engineering at Greenwich High School in Connecticut since 2001. She's the author of the book Teaching Music Through Composition, a Curriculum Using Technology, published by Oxford University Press. She's a technology trainer, leads professional development workshops around the country, and is a consultant to schools and districts on building technology labs and integrating technology into the curriculum. Barbara is the co-president of the Music Educator Technologists Association and the Technology Institute for Music Educators, the Connecticut chapter. She holds a Bachelor of Science and Master of Music in Performance from Brooklyn College Conservatory of Music City, University of New York, and Professional Studies Diploma from the Mannes College of Music. Barbara performs regularly with the Ridgefield and Bridgeport Symphonies. She studied conducting at the Hart School of Music and Westminster Choir College and the Juilliard School. Barbara's motto resounds today: teach music, the technology will follow. And it has become a rallying cry for music technology teachers around the world. I can't imagine anyone better to help me foray into this field. Barbara walks me through the world of music technology in general and electronic music specifically. This is something that has recently made a huge impact on my own life, as you'll hear in the episode, since my 13-year-old gifted son decided that a good music extension for him would be to get this thing called a launchpad. And I was like, what is a launchpad? And how does it make music? Can it really help him be a better musician, or is it just a toy? How can it help him be a better percussionist in his school band and orchestra? Will it still be seen as a legitimate musician or composer if all he's doing is pushing buttons? The good news is, Barbara is here to help us navigate the tech that teaches music and that creates composers and musicians and performers alike. This may be the way you reach the other 80% of the students at your school, the ones who aren't in band, orchestra, or choir. This could be a great way to help the STEM prioritized communities recognize that the arts really should be incorporated, and the acronym really is STEAM. It may also be a great way to advocate for a chunk of that big technology budget that seems so robust in your school, or give you a great project to write grants for. And speaking of music technology, this podcast is brought to you by one of the leaders in music technology, Smart Music. You all know Smart Music's ability to engage your students in practicing at home, but did you know you can now create the music you want them to practice? Create your own custom notation from scratch, as well as import or export music XML files between most popular music notation products. All of this and helping you streamline your assessments. Give Smart Music a try with you and your students for free for 30 days. Just visit smartmusic.com to learn more. You'll also want to visit the Smart Music blog to access the show notes and links for this episode. It's number 51 of the Music Ed Mentor podcast. Now, let's figure out how electronic music can help us create musicians.
So hi, I'm Barbara Friedman, and I am talking to you from New York City, actually. This is where I am from. So if you hear a Brooklyn accent, you have to kind of, get over it and listen. And you got a problem with that is usually what I say.
No, my husband lived in Brooklyn for years when he was working in New York. He went to NYU.
Oh, great. And he talks like this now, right? Okay.
I wish.
Yeah. So I teach electronic music, studio production and composition, recording engineering at Greenwich High School in Greenwich, Connecticut. And I have been teaching there for 18 years in that capacity. This school started its electronic music class in 1969.
No way.
Absolutely way. It's one of the oldest in the country.
That is
if
so
not
crazy.
The world.
I didn't know electronics existed back then.
Well, it was, I think what happened was they had one kind of synthesizer-y type oscillating machine, and the curriculum was to kind of go through the manual. This is how you use this machine, and it generates sounds and things like that. That was part of what they did in that class. Of course, tape editing and things like that. There was a lot of stuff. And it was started by a woman named Anne Modugno, and she is an icon in the Greenwich community. And she is still around. And we just opened a brand new lab and recording studio, which is honoring her, her name is on the outside, honoring her. And she came and saw it and everything. She's in her 80s, and she's just a vibrant, wonderful human being. And it's like one of the oldest running, it's the longest running, oldest running in the country. It might be one of the first ever, what we call music technology classes in the country, if not the world. So I think I'm the 5th or the 6th teacher to do it. And I am exclusively full-time music technology teacher, as they say. Students can take my class, an introductory class, and go all the way through a 4-year sequence of learning, and go from knowing nothing or close to nothing about music and technology, and then go into it in college. Actually, the 4 branches that are kind of common branches, it's in the culture for this community because it's been around for so long, is band, orchestra, chorus, and electronic music. And I'm really happy to say that electronic music has more students participating in it than any of the other programs.
Well, that is really impressive. So my question for you is, what do you mean by electronic music? Can you kind of is it push a button, make a sound, or is it like recording and editing, or is it like composition?
Yes, it's all of it. So the name electronic music is the name of the class as it goes back to 1969. We keep that, honor that name and that tradition in the school. Really, and what we do is I take an approach of teaching using composition. My book is published by Oxford University Press. It's called Teaching Music Through Composition, a Curriculum Using Technology. So what happened was I came to Greenwich in the year 2001, and the equipment evolved over time. The first class used a manual, I guess, for an oscillator, as I think I said already, and they used other things to create music and tape and stuff. And so as technology evolved and as things became available, so did the course and the curriculum. So when I came into the program, we had 8 Macintosh computers sort of around the room, and they were using. No, they weren't Macintosh, excuse me. They were hand-me-down PCs. And they were using sound cards, and it was coming out of the sound card with a SCSI cable going into a synthesizer and a mixing board and back into the computer and all this stuff. And it was just a chaos of wires and things. And of course, they were hand-me-down computers, so they had to be rebooted every 20 minutes because they crashed. And the program we were using then was something called Mark of the Unicorn, Motu Freestyle. And it looks a lot like the piano editor role in almost every single DAW now, where you have notes and lines, but it was exclusively this graphic linear notation.
What's a DAW?
A sorry, a digital audio workstation.
Gotcha.
So that would be a fancy term for, the generic term for something that would be GarageBand or Mixcraft, Pro Tools, etc., Ableton Live, things like
Okay.
that. So it's a digital audio workstation, uses clearly digital with audio, and in most cases it uses something called MIDI, musical instrument digital interface, which is the lines and dashes and slashes that show up in music programs. It's non-traditional music notation. It's really the computer language of music, MIDI.
Wow.
So
My mind like kind of just exploded.
really,
Yeah, like I
why?
have talked about MIDI for 20 years, right?
Yeah,
Because I worked in a music store and people would be like, now is this like MIDI capable? And
yeah.
I always just assumed it was for, some nonsense words. I had no idea what they were. I didn't care.
Well, what happened in around I'm going to say 87, 89, because there's some debate over who did it first, kind of thing. Instrument manufacturers, I mean, this is the short story. I think I got it right. Someone's going to write in and say, no, you got it wrong. So just correct me if I'm wrong. And that is, they decided that here's this new thing called digital. We need to come up with some sort of universal language. So even if Yamaha and Roland, who are competing companies, like, well, how do we get them to talk to each other digitally? We have to come up with a common coding system so that my synthesizer can talk to your synthesizer. Because basically a synthesizer is just a little teeny cute computer brain, as they called it, with built-in sounds and computing brain built into a keyboard. And so when you hit a keyboard note, you're triggering a series of code, really, which tells you, well, I hit this note, which has a number, and I hit this note at a certain, what's called velocity, how hard, how fast. I held it for a certain period of time. And now I'm going to assign it a particular instrument name. And there are other MIDI parameters, as they were, around that. But basically, it's like, well, how do we code that? How do we get that common? And MIDI 1.0 is still in use today. There's the only thing that's changed about MIDI is there's a whole second bank of sounds that are available, MIDI 2 sounds. But generally speaking, the coding is the same from 1989. It's fairly perfect. It's very simple and it's fairly perfect. So the idea behind MIDI is that it was a way for computers or synthesizers and other musical instruments to exchange information regardless of the brand that it was. So anyway, so there's MIDI and audio. Audio is like recording, the squiggly lines that you see online. So a digital audio workstation basically is a way to take all of this stuff digitally and manipulate it all at once. So it makes music creation today really a little bit more sophisticated than it was even 10 years ago. And in that you can really be able to do MIDI and audio and notation all in one package of software if you wanted to do it. Certain software is better for certain things. Like I wouldn't say if you're going to want printed pages of music for kids to play pieces off of, I wouldn't say use GarageBand or Logic, even though Logic has a fairly robust music notation end. I wouldn't say use that. Use, something like Sibelius or Finale or Flat or whatever, or Note Flight or, even MuseScore. But certain software lends itself better to certain treatments. So,
Right.
Anyway, back to my classroom.
No, this is like super good because, like I said, so
Yeah.
I was kind of, coming of age about the same time as a lot of that kind of early music notation and MIDI stuff. And like you could actually play on the piano and have it interpreted into your music software. And
Right.
that was kind of mind blowing. And it was also awful because it was completely inaccurate. Like you had to be absolutely dead on the beat for it to show up dead on the beat.
Right.
Has it improved since then? Because then, I took this long kind of hiatus away from music notation or music software of any kind, really.
Right.
And now in my household, we have a, subscription to Ableton Live.
Right.
Everybody uses MuseScore all the time. Like it's commonplace now. I think there's so many opportunities out there that you just have to try them and find which one works
Yeah, I
for
mean,
you.
look, I use in my classroom, we use GarageBand and Logic. And the reason we did that is because we were creating a new lab in and around 2003, 4. And no, it was around, yeah. Yeah. So I wanted to get a computer and a server and software that all worked together. So we were getting computer, server, and Logic because Apple had just bought Logic from eMagic at the time or a couple of years before. And then in 2005, GarageBand came around. So the impetus for me choosing software back in the day was really because I wanted an Apple product to work with an Apple product to work with an Apple product. If we're doing that, because I spent too much time dealing with problems of things not working well with each other. So that was really the reason I chose that platform and chose Apple at the time. Fortunately, Logic is considered one of the top pieces of software in the world, so that's great. I have students who use Ableton, and I've looked at Ableton. I've used Ableton. I don't have a problem with it. I don't teach with it. It's available in my classroom. Kids use it. We also do DJing stuff, and we do Pro Tools. We have that also. But my feeling about it is I have no objection to it. I have a lot of kids who use FL Studio. It's the industry standard in Latin music, actually, in and around New York City. So, yeah. And some people still use MPCs to make hip hop music. I mean, it's just whatever is the hot thing somebody uses, and somebody wins a Grammy, and they said, "Yeah, man, I made this on an MPC." Boom, the MPC is selling like wildfire,
Right.
But as I tell my students, it's like, look, you want to drive a BMW or do you want to drive a Mercedes Benz? They're fantastic cars. At some point, you have some caliber of item, right? And then you have to decide. It's personal choice.
Right.
Do you like a Camaro or do you like a Mustang? They're fantastic cars of a certain ilk, a genre, as it were. But it's like, so you have to decide what your preference is. You can't say that, a Mustang is not as good a car as a Camaro or vice versa. It becomes personal choice. So the same is true when you're dealing with really high quality software. So is Sibelius, Finale, whatever. So I'm with you. It's like, what works? I don't know.
Right.
What works for you?
Have you discovered BandLab yet?
I have looked at BandLab. Absolutely. I've looked at it a little bit. Sure. I'm going to tell you all of the online platforms now for digital audio equipment, like the quote unquote GarageBand Mixcraft. I only say that because they were like one of the first ones.
Sure.
So Soundation, Soundtrap, BandLab, any of those online, the ones that you can access online, you don't have to download it and use it on your computer. Any of them that can be accessed in the cloud. I mean, I've said this before, the one that is going to win, take note, y'all who are in Soundtrap and Soundation and all that, and BandLab. The one who's really going to win the market is the first one to be able to put video in. Not video editing, but that I can load video in and kids could add music to video.
Right.
This is very important in this day and age because kids are so visually oriented.
Right.
And it's actually some of the projects that we do. It's just part of life.
Yeah,
I don't have to edit in the software, but I have to be able to load it in and track my music to it.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to email all of them and be like, here's what Barbara says you need to do.
I think they know.
Hashtag next level, people.
That's it.
All right. So I'm going to backtrack just a little bit, but this has been super enlightening already, which thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, because you always hear like, this is the one that I use. This is the one that's best. But it really does come down to personal preference, and your, analogy with sports cars, totally apt. So perfect. My question is, as a classroom music teacher, I feel a lot of pressure to be a Shauna Longo, who, as you and I have discussed privately, is amazing and absolutely one of the top, technology and music education teachers in the world. But I have a very small schedule. I work at a small school. I teach a lot of different subjects. I teach every grade level from kindergarten through 8th grade. What technology do I need? Like, what is going to help me instead of what do I feel pressured to implement because other people are?
Well, I don't think that question has changed for ages, because I don't know that, the technology that's available today is one thing, but there was a time when teachers were faced with the daunting task of going from the quill and ink well to this thing called a fountain pen. And it was like, what, how do I do this? Why do I do this? How do I get my kids to do it? They have to change how their handwriting is. I don't want to do it. I'm not comfortable doing it. Technology is technology. And how you use it and implement it and people's fear about it, I don't think has really changed. So to be more specific to really, and to contemporary things, there's two tracks of technology that teachers can take. One is, how do I use technology to make my life as a teacher easier? And then how do I use technology in the classroom so that students are engaged with technology in learning and creation?
Right.
So there's two sides of it.
Okay.
How you make your life easier as a teacher utilizing technology to create lessons, to disseminate information to students, to use in the classroom as a way to, people use smartboard. That's technology, to disseminate information and engage students. How do you get kids to create and learn using technology? I teach using the slant of using composition. This is what I do. Some people actually teach the technology. Like if you push this button, it arpeggiates a note on the note that you push it. Kids are like, oh, wow, cool. And then they start pushing buttons and they set a tempo and they push buttons and they go. I teach from a different angle where I'm saying, look at the piano keyboard and this is C and this is the scale and this is the chord and this is what an arpeggio is, which is, do, mi, sol, do, whatever. And that's an arpeggio. We can do it in this key and this key and this key.
Right.
And then the kids have to play it. I tend not to show them the button I used to never show them the button. Recently, I've been showing them the button in the last year. And they're like, why didn't you show me that, miss? And I'm like, well, now you know what an arpeggio is, music from a music perspective. Now, that's not to say that people who teach the button don't go back and say, look, take a look, an arpeggio, you hear that thing? Really what's happening is do, mi, sol, do, but it's just a different approach. I think I'm digressing from the...
No, you're fine. You're
Okay.
fine. So let's break it down then into the two groups that you said. So what are some ways that we can use technology to make our life easier as a teacher? Do you have any insight on that?
I'm going to tell you that I just completed my PhD in learning technologies. Yay, me, yay.
Yay.
Thanks. I needed a roar from the crowd. So
wait.
Thank you.
You should have asked me for a drum. I can do a drum thing too.
Give me a drum roll. Go.
Can you hear it?
There you go.
Okay.
Perfect. So I didn't get a PhD in music. It's not specific to music. It's in learning technologies. So how do you use technology in teaching and learning? And so there you go. So the first thing I would say to people is, in schools, there are some things that the school absolutely requires you to do. And they're going to say, you got to do this. So if you have to do it, that would be the first thing I would say, spend your time doing it, because you have to do it. They want you to do it. If our school went to taking attendance using the computer as opposed to Scantrons at some point, and so we had to do it. People were kind of moaning and groaning, but now everybody does it as a matter of fact, and we just do it. They want you to make sure you do certain things in the technology. So if the first thing I would spend your time on is whatever it is that the school district says you must use. And if they say you're using what's called a learning management system, right, an LMS, which is something like Canvas or Blackboard or Schoology or Music First, and what that is like a closed digital classroom where you can disseminate and create information and do lessons and tests and all kinds of things inside this thing. So if they say, look, you have to start using the LMS, then do one lesson and learn it. So I would always say to teachers, just start with what you have to on that end. Then there are things that that are like, wow, if remember that thing? There's that thing. You know what that thing is. Everybody's thinking about that piece of technology. If I had the time to learn it, that would be really cool. Well, just pick one thing and try and do one lesson around it. Do one thing that you want to do and just do it. You have to, unfortunately, a lot of us have to actually set the time aside, which is why there are these summer or evening professional development classes that you can do online or in person. I teach a few myself. And so, some people were like, I've always wanted to, really, really always wanted to learn GarageBand and do a couple of units, or I have to teach using GarageBand. So, Barb Friedman teaches a course online, do it. Or somebody else, teaches at a university, and you put yourself in the environment, you box yourself in for a week or 5 days or whatever it is, and you just do it. A lot of us say we're going to do it on our own. We never do. Or you create a study group together, and do it.
Right.
And somehow try and do that. So as far as learning to teach, pick something that you have to do first.
Right.
And something you always wanted to. So the thing about the teaching side, because I know you're going to ask the second question. Are we up to the second question yet?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. Good timing. So as far as the teaching is concerned, start with whatever your school is telling you have to use and do that. I'm not a big fan of, believe it or not, even though I have a lot of technology around me and I use it and I have obviously a PhD in it, but I am not a big fan of going out and buying the latest and greatest. I'm just not a big fan of it. Find what you have and use what you have, even if you use it a little. And there's so much free stuff online. It's ridiculous. So, and start with one lesson. Start with one project, one thing, and then keep doing what you're doing. And I would say, look, I teach in high school where I teach exclusively using digital technologies. And kids are also learning modern band instruments, guitar, bass, drums, piano, things like that. This is something I started this year.
Right.
Putting into some of the classes, and they love it. So, and putting it all together, because that's really what 21st century music creation is in contemporary popular music, is putting it all together. I also say to teachers, teach to your strength, teach to your strength, absolutely teach to your strength. Whatever you're strong with, find what could you do that you could use technology with. I think Amy Burns is really brilliant about this, and I really like what she does. She's an elementary music teacher, and look, she uses Orff instruments. She sings, she moves, she dances, she does all the stuff you want elementary kids to be doing. And she does this thing with iPads, and she does this thing with other computing devices and such. And there's a lot of elementary teachers that do that. So teach to your strength, include it all. I think middle school is also a good place to be mixing it up always, not just using technology. And high school kids start to get a little bit more specialized. But even in my classes, look, if kids take my, advance into some of the higher classes, like we do some songwriting and recording, and I just went back to something I started doing when I first started teaching in high school. I started teaching in high school in New York City, and not far from where I live. And we had to do an applied learning unit. It was basically a music history lecture class because there were 50 students in a classroom. Yes, I said 50. There were 50.
Yeah, that's impressive. That's impressive. Go on.
So anyway, so I'm just saying there were 50 in a class. And then, so we had to do applied learning, and people were doing recorders, and there was no way I was doing recorders with all that squeaking and stuff. So I was the chorus teacher, believe it or not. Don't tell anyone. And I did kazoos because I had read in a book. I wish I knew who it was. She was teaching about singing the cambiata, boy's voice. And she said, some kids are really shy, so stick a kazoo in their mouth. And I thought, that's brilliant. So I went and got kazoos, the Hohner kazoo. You can buy them in a box of 50.
Uh-huh.
And I put them in Ziploc bags. They were new at the time, believe it or not. We had the little zipper, and they could zip open. And the kids would write their name on the bag, put their kazoo in the bag, and I would keep the bags in a box, each class set. The kids would come and they'd get their kazoos, and I would write on the board, and I would play on the piano, and I'd go do, re, do, and they go brr, 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 do, re, mi, re, do, do, brr, and I'd point to the notes on the staff, and I'd point, whatever, I'd point to the notes, and then eventually they would be able to sight sing with the kazoo in their mouth. They're thinking do, re, mi, fa, sol, right? but they're just going do, do, do. And it was brilliant. 50 kids doing it in tune, sight singing, sight reading.
Wait, you lost me when you said that you opted for kazoos over recorders.
I did. Okay, wait. But get this. I know you think it's funny. I went back to kazoos recently because I have a songwriting class and a songwriting section, and all these kids are doing it. They don't want to sing. So I need to get them to sing. So I stick a kazoo in their mouth, and we do basically solfege, ear training stuff. All that stuff that you did in college, right? Little exercise,
Right.
this, and reading off the notation. Because I'm training their ear. I'm trying to train their ear, not necessarily their voice, some of them their voice, but then to get them to sing. They don't want to sing. But if you stick a kazoo in their mouth, they're quote unquote playing the kazoo. You get it? It's a way to trick them into singing.
Right. No, I get it. That's great.
And every kid should be singing. I didn't grow up singing personally. I started singing later in life, but I think every kid could and should be singing, and it trains their ear. If I can train kids to sing and to understand, because then they hear it in their head, right? They audiate, I guess is the term that has been used. They begin to hear it in their head, and they said, okay, so, it's easier for them to create melodic lines if they sing. They actually begin to get a better understanding of the language of music through singing and playing an instrument, but you can do both. Okay, you're still in shock about the kazoo part?
No. I'm loving it because you're making total sense to me.
I actually wrote a book, a little kazoo book. I think I might just, put it out there for people. And it's showing you, it gives you exercise, tells you how to do this, gives you back some background. It's like a freebie, I guess I could put out there.
That would be amazing.
I was thinking about doing, now that I'm done with my PhD and everybody knows me as the technology guru, I was actually thinking about doing sessions on kazoo at conferences.
Well, good. You can come on the International Music Education Summit next year.
I'd be happy to. That would be great.
We'd love that.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
But yeah, no, it totally makes sense because like when my fifth graders who just started on band instruments this year, it's compulsory. So everybody has to do it, whether they want to or not. And so that means, of course, most of them don't want to do it. But they are amazing singers because I've trained them to be over the last 4 years.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
And so when I have them sing their part first and then play it, they get it every time.
See, you've trained kids to be singers at a young age, which is fantastic. We get a lot of kids, and that's just not the case. So,
yeah, isn't that so ironic that some of their biggest influences in their lives are these singing, performing artists?
Yeah.
And yet they're in middle school and high school going, oh, I don't want to sing. Oh, I don't want to sing. I mean, I want to listen to Billie Eilish, but I don't want to sing.
Well, it's a self-conscious thing.
You think
I have
so?
kids. Yeah, I made kids. Like in my most advanced class, I kind of trick them into recreating a piece that they think is like great. I say, what's the genre that you like? And I get them into little groups, and I've got, little bunches of kids, 3 here, 4 there. They're doing hip hop, but what kind of hip hop? Which one? Oh, this piece speaks to me, that piece, this one likes that one, this guy likes EDM. Anyway, so I get them, they do their thing. I say, okay, what's the piece that you love? And these little groups, they agree on it. And I go, great. Okay, guess what? Go recreate it. And they're like deer in headlight. What? Yeah, go recreate that piece in Logic. And it is very hard. And they have to learn, not just get the music down, but if they're doing hip hop, they can't rap, and they must rap if they're doing it, and they must sing if they picked a piece with a song, right? And if they picked an instrumental piece, they have to play some of the instrumental stuff. And remember, it's my most advanced class. So they can't do the rap that's on the radio or on Spotify, whatever they hear, because it's not school appropriate. We may listen to it together privately so I can get an idea of what the piece is, but they can't do that rap. They have to come up with their own rap and rap. It's amazing what they do. And they're like, well, I'm not a rapper. Of course you are. It's just go. You may not be a professional rapper. You may not be a professional singer, but get in there and do it. Get some pride, get some courage, do it. And they do. It's not professional necessarily. Some they're like, oh my goodness, listen to that guy go. He's fantastic. And it's like, yeah, I rap in the shower. Well, guess what? Stick a mic in front of your face. You'll see what happens. Kids want to do it. They just don't want to do it in public, and they don't want to be criticized. and they don't want to feel bad, it's very exposed. And so if they can do it a little bit on their own and get encouragement, and it's private, and get encouragement and kind of break out, and do it, man.
Nice. Make it a safe space, and an input plus one is the term I recently learned.
Oh, cool. Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've
Yes.
got some good ideas for getting them engaged and learning. And we've talked about composition, and we've talked about recording. And what else is there? I use YouTube a whole lot. Does that count? Do I get bonus points?
YouTube for what? What do you mean?
Everything.
I don't
Everything.
understand. Yeah.
Okay. So I just remember like back 20 years ago when I first started in teaching, and classroom technology was like a checkbox on my teacher evaluations
Right.
3 times a year.
Right.
And it was like, are you using technology? And I'm like, I'm a freaking band teacher. What technology do I need? Right. But now I use karaoke tracks. We use audio editing and video editing. We use, I use YouTube drum tracks all the time for my beginning band warm-ups. They love it.
That's great.
Yeah, so it's kind of crazy. So here's my big question for you. Are we still creating music? Are we still creating musicians when they're doing music technology stuff? Like, for example, my son he uses Ableton Live, and he begged for a launch pad for Christmas, and I had to like look it up and figure out that, like, is this a musical instrument? It's basically 64 buttons that can be programmed with 8 different sounds each, or pre-programmed sounds or whatever, which even to me in my, ultimate technology savvy was like, what is this? Does this count?
Well, look, it's there's a couple of layers and levels to it. The first is that is he creating his own loops? Some people do, some people don't. Now, I use loops, pre-recorded loops that appear in all of the software, are perfectly legit and valuable to use. Kids can really create with them and have an idea. If you're doing form and structure, kids can create with them. You say A, B form, and they get that, and they can use pre-recorded loops. They don't have to understand how to create chords and melody. My students, because they're high school students, they learn about composition by learning music theory at the keyboard and playing and creating their own loops. They only have very few opportunities to use pre-recorded loops. So they have to create their own music in the software. So so they create graphically, linearly in the software, and they're creating music that is newly composed music. I mean, we did a recreation piece that teaches certain things, but they do mostly create music from scratch. So I teach composition and composition skills and techniques, and they also have to understand certain audio engineering skills and mixing engineering, because it's like, well, you have a band in front of you and everybody plays, but you're the conductor and you say, okay, no, softer here, louder there. You come out more here, you come out more there. Those are the things that you do in the software. As basically the producer, you're the conductor also. You decide, I want this instrument louder, this instrument softer. Oh, at this point in the piece, I want this instrument louder, that instrument softer. So that's what you have to do. So you're the composer and the producer and the conductor and the orchestrator and the audio engineer, all in one. You are the everything. I think it was Tobias, and what's his first name? Evan Tobias wrote an article about the hyphenated musician, the hyphenated student. They are the composer - producer, right? The beat maker - producer. So students who work inside of and do this, people who do this, are multifaceted. So what your son is doing when he's using an Ableton push is he's programming a series of pads, and he has to understand and memorize that under this one pad in the grid, there are 8 layers of sounds, and what are they? And he's basically memorizing it. So this is not graphic that goes from left to right. It's what's called nonlinear. And that takes a certain level kind of thinking to remember what's where on the pad and the grid. It's sort of like the Rubik's Cube of music layering. Where is it? And how do I get at it? You know what I mean? And then the other thing is, even though he's triggering by hitting the key and he triggers a 4-measure loop or whatever it's programmed to do, he has to know and create over time and actually plan this piece that's going to be performed. So this is in a way, it's an extension of something that they could probably look up and see as a performance DJing. It's not just, spin this record on the left and then mix that one on the right when that tune is over. I'm mixing, matching everything, this kind of performance DJing. They're using these electronic instruments, the turntables, the pads, the faders, the oscillators, the EQ adjustment knobs, all are in a highly, highly choreographed, composed, live performance composition. It's meant to be done live. And it's very competitive stuff, and it's very difficult. So they're playing these electronic instruments as if they are instruments, and it is really difficult to do.
That is so cool. I'm so glad you said. No,
I'm going to have to find a link and give it to you about someone doing it. It's not. It's difficult to find them that are all rated G, so they might be a little.
No, there's actually, like 4 years ago, there was this TED Talk from Mark Ronson, who's a really well-known producer, who talks about music and sampling, and he does this like live on stage. And so I will put a link to that in the show notes so that people can check that out.
There's also a guy named DJ Shifty, Shiftee, and he won like international competitions. And I happen to know him because I know his mother. And his mother used to be an administrator in our building. And so if you go look him up, I just warn people that, look, contemporary popular music, especially hip hop and dance music and such, is not all classroom appropriate. So you have to be careful about those things.
Right.
If you're sensitive to listening to that on your own, I warn people in advance about looking them up. But
so I should clarify with you too that my son is pretty classically trained. Like he plays he's only in 7th grade.
Yeah.
So he's in jazz band and he's in concert band. He plays in the community band that I conduct. And so he like does 4-part mallet marimba stuff. He plays drum set. He's a great snare drum player and, all the toys. So this is just, I see it as an extension for him as a child who's quite exceptional in this way. And I love that you brought up the Rubik's Cube thing, because for a long time he was really into Rubik's Cube and he was just brilliantly fast at it. And like we took him to competition and stuff, but then his interest kind of changed to music. And so now I'm really glad that I invested in that launch pad.
Yeah, it's going to be good. I tell you the other thing. The thing about it is look, I'm a classical percussionist, and I have all of my degrees are in performance, and I still play. I play with the symphony orchestras up here. I freelance. I've played on Broadway. I've conducted the community band in Greenwich for 9 years. I conducted opera. I'm a huge fan of classical, so-called serious music. No problem about it. And I want my kids learning from that kind of perspective. I also teach hip hop and EDM because that's the music they want to learn. That's what hooks them in and brings them into my classroom. If I can teach them how to make that bass drum shake the rear view mirror of their mother's car till it almost cracks, that's what they want to learn. But when they're doing that, they're also adding chords and melody and harmonies and understanding arpeggiations and how do I orchestrate this whole thing, even if it's in a digital audio workstation, even if it's in Logic. They are learning about music and they're composing. Now, as a performer, I know, because I've studied it a lot and I've played it a lot, this is my thing. I am a recreation artist. I recreate the intentions of the composer in the context of a live performance that is governed by a conductor. And we all agree to do what we know as is artistically considered accurate for the performance style and practice of that particular composer, and according to the interpretation of the conductor to our best of our ability. So a recreation artist takes a great deal of work and practice and skill. I'm teaching creations. Kids are creating from scratch. absolutely creating music from scratch. And they don't get to do that in band necessarily, unless they're doing composition in band. They don't do that in choir. They recreate. It's a different approach. And the ironic thing about it is, I mean, what's the national standard? And what was even in the first national standard? It was always create, 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 create. People are afraid. People are afraid to create. People don't know. If I said you could take any number of orchestral musicians, I was having a conversation with someone who was a fantastic musician, great cellist. And we're like, yeah, man, you just got to jam. And she's like, I do not improvise. It's like, why not? Even if you improvised in the classical style, people, they don't have any access to it because they've never done it.
Yeah.
I don't know how to compose, right? I mean, one of the reasons I wrote my book is because there was nothing. I had to figure it out. How do you teach composition? What do you do? How do you go about it? You don't just teach theory in its raw form. You have to teach kids that need to compose. They have to come up with something. How do you do that?
Right.
There was nothing available at the time. I want to tell you, do want to say one thing, if you don't mind me saying, since we're on the subject of recreation and creation. I teach a music technology class, and I love for people to do more technology classes and have this available. I just did my dissertation on the impact of implementing a technology class on music department enrollment, because there's a lot of people who think, well, if we do one of these classes, I mean, look at Friedman. She's got more students in her classes than they do in band or chorus or orchestra in her school. Third largest high school in Connecticut with 2,700 students. And what's the most requested and taken classes in the building? Electronic music. We had to add another teacher. So people are afraid it's going to impact the band program or it's going to impact the choir program. And because I do work with teachers all over the world and all over the United States, I know anecdotally, I knew that it does not negatively impact the band or the chorus program. It just doesn't. You're getting kids getting other kids. There are other kids that don't want to be in band or chorus or couldn't or whatever. That's not their thing, band or chorus. Only 20% of the school population on average in a high school takes band or chorus or performing ensemble of some sort. So what are you doing with the other 80? That's been a big conversation in music technology professionals for a while. And that's spearheaded by like Rick Dammers and David Brian Williams. So what are we doing with them? So I know. And so I just did my dissertation on it. And it was an impact study of 12 schools in the Northeast. And there is no significant change in enrollment in band or chorus after implementing a technology-based music program in the study that I did. So I think that people could be looking at doing these kinds of classes on the high school level, like singleton classes, much like they would do guitar or ukulele or something else. If somebody has interest and wants to, it will not negatively impact the band program. But people are afraid to do it because they think it will.
Ironically, it might actually get more kids interested in music and become a recruiting tool for those traditional ensembles.
Yeah, that's the thing that my study also showed amongst these 12 schools, that when they implement, I looked at 6 years across 12 schools. What was the enrollment like in all the classes, and what happened at that year, that fourth year, 1 through 6, fourth year, you put in this technology. What happened in band and orchestra? What happened after? What was the trend? So there was no impact in band, no statistically significant impact in band and chorus, and the other classes that were offered clearly went down. The teachers teaching didn't. So it's as if teachers almost, instead of teaching that class they used to teach, now they're teaching this technology class. And enrollment in the music department went up. More kids started taking music. They started taking music technology classes. So it was like, oh, we have a class now that's actually appealing to kids. How many kids opt to take a music history class?
Right.
And I know we offer them because I used to teach them, because they're basically credit mills, as I call them, Like, look, I have to, these kids need their credit. What's the easiest way? Stick 50 of them in a room and teach music history. What the heck else are you going to do? Kazoo.
A recorder.
Yeah, recorder. So I know you're shocked that I didn't teach recorder.
I love that you...
It really is what matters, is to engage them and get them in your classroom and have them have a good time and create music. I mean, If I asked you, do you compose? And, any of the listeners listening, ask yourself, do you compose? Many people would say, no, I don't compose. And if I said, well, what would be the first step for you to compose? Even on your instrument, even if you played trumpet or if you played recorder, what would you compose? And the first thing I think people would do is just kind of doodle a little. That's improvisation. If you're doodling, you're kind of exploring, right?
Right.
You're exploring,
And who knows, your music technology students of today are going to be your music advocates of tomorrow. They're going to be the ones who are like, we need to keep band in this school because music made a difference in my life as a kid.
Yeah, everybody has their draw. So, and band will always be in this country as long as we have football. So I'm not worried about it.
As long as we've got Texas.
That's it. Yay, Texas.
Awesome. Well, Barbara, this has just been so charming and such a pleasure to talk to you about music technology and your views on it, and especially the creation bit, and, keeping our lives simple and not being forced to implement stuff unless we have to. And it's
absolutely.
a pleasure and a joy. And, why not embrace what the kids can relate to?
Yeah, what they can relate to. Right.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. I really, really enjoyed it. And anytime, always a pleasure talking about music. I just get caught up in it.
Nice. And congrats on your doctorate.
Yay. Thank you.
I hope that this episode has helped you consider the music tech you want to invest in within your own classroom and your own school, and maybe use it to build your music program. It's a big old world of technology out there, and more, the struggle to balance what we want and what we need with what's best for our students is a real one. We shouldn't feel pressured to incorporate music technology or electronic music just for the sake of seeming like we're early adopters and innovators. But remember, electronic music is still teaching music and creating musicians who will be your advocates in the future. We should teach music and let the technology follow, just like Barbara says. I also hope you have enjoyed this content as much as I have enjoyed creating it for you. I send a gracious thank you to all of you for taking your time to listen to this podcast. Please help us spread the word by sharing this podcast, opening up your app and giving us a 5-star rating, and subscribing too. And if there's someone in the world of music education you're just dying to hear from, let us know. You can reach me on my personal website, elisajansen.com. Until next time, my friends, keep teaching on.